One of the bloodiest and most costly battles in the noble history of the Blood Angels, the Sons of Sanguinius, took place in the closing days of the 41st millennium, when the largest tendril of Hive Fleet Leviathan ever recorded descended upon the Baal system, homeworld of the Blood Angels Space Marines. This encounter pushed the noble Blood Angels chapter to near extinction, and would later become known as the Devastation of Baal. The first indication of the approaching doom came to light when a transmission was received on Baal in 998 of the 41st millennium that the Krypton shield had fallen. This was the name given to the fortified worlds of the Cryptus system, long intended to hold back the might of an incoming Hive Fleet. It was established after the wake of destruction left by Hive Fleet Behemoth in anticipation of something far greater in scale and even more terrifying. Sensing the horrors that were fast approaching, Dante, commander of the Blood Angels, had put plans in motion to defend their homeworld. Detached strike forces fought hit-and-run battles with the Hive's smaller splinter fleets throughout the Red Scar in an attempt to grind the progress of the Hive Fleet to a halt. Meanwhile, the defences of Baal and its twin moons of Baal Prime and Baal Secundus were bolstered like never before. Colossal fortresses rose above the sweltering sands, and surface-mounted defence systems were deployed in great numbers. A call for reinforcements was made to the Blood Angels' successor chapters, who gathered from across the galaxy to defend the honour of their chapter. Even with the additional troops, it still did not seem to be enough, for the Tyranids were seemingly without number, and Hive Fleet Leviathan was learning the weaknesses of its prey at an exponential rate. Knowing that the consumption of the Cryptus system would open the floodgates for an unstoppable Tyranid invasion on Baal, Commander Dante took action. He assembled a mighty strike force comprised of the 1st and 2nd companies of the Blood Angels, Brother Corbulo, Captain Carleon, Chief Librarian Mephiston, and the bulk of Gabriel Seth's Flesh Terrors, and ventured into the Cryptus system. This strike force assault would later be known as the Cryptus campaign. The gathering of this strike force proved invaluable, as it reached the Cryptus system in time to aid the last hard-pressed Imperial defenders and avert complete catastrophe. Yet the savage war that followed would see both Imperial and Xenos forces suffering rapidly escalating casualties. In a desperate attempt to stop the onrushing Splinter Fleet, the Blood Angels were eventually forced to unleash an ancient weapon of terrible destructive force, called the Magna Vitrium, to annihilate an entire world of the Cryptus system and use its debris to devastate the encroaching Hive Fleet. However, showing his wisdom, Dante accepted that the Tyranids had only been slowed but not stopped. The Blood Angels commander ordered his forces to return to Baal. His chapter intended to fight for its survival upon the worlds of its birth. By the opening days of the 999th year in the 41st millennium, the Baal system had been reinforced like never before. Answering Commander Dante's call, one Blood Angel successor chapter after another arrived to lend much, if not all, of their strength to their first founding chapter. Slab-sided ground defences were raised upon the blasted sands of Baal Prime and Baal Secundus, and even around the fortress monastery of the Arx Angelicum on Baal itself. Auspex screens designed to detect deep void activity started to glow red with contact runes, as a colossal tidal wave of chitin-armoured bioforms surged into the Baal system. Fleets of cruisers and battle barges gathered in the void around Baal and its moons in preparation, their combined might enough to crush star systems and end worlds. Still, it seemed unlikely that it would prove enough. The time had come for Commander Dante, Chapter Master of the Blood Angels, to lead the defence of the Baal system. With the Tyranids closing in, Commander Dante and his closest officers authorised the removal of the Blood Angels' precious gene seed reserves from their storage crypts, which were then packed carefully for transit under the watchful eyes of sanguinary priests, and then sent away on a swift starship with a small complement of the commander's most loyal guards. At the same time, Blood Angels' gunships gathered every viable aspirant they could from amongst the nomadic tribes of Baal Prime and Baal Secundus. These new recruits were armed and then ferried to the Arx Angelicum on Baal. There they formed defensive garrisons whose strength was intended to augment that of Sanguinius' sons. At least 40,000 aspirants were gathered in this way, and as a millennia of tradition was cast aside, were told that any who survived the coming battle would prove their worthiness to be initiated into the chapter's ranks. Little is said of the remaining tribesmen on Baal. Given what limited resources the Blood Angels can spare, they were left to hide or stand as they saw fit. Any Tyranids they managed to kill would be fewer monstrosities for the Blood Angels and their successors to deal with, but the tribesmen were not expected to weather the horrors that followed, and most did not. Knowing that the fate of his chapter, and perhaps of the Imperium itself, would rest upon the defence of Baal, Dante had sent out the call to the Blood Angels' successor chapters, telling of the doom that was approaching the homeworld of their beloved Primarch Sanguinius. All came to the Blood Angels' aid, from the ferocious flesh terrors to the noble blood drinkers, and even the savage insular warriors of the Carmine Blades. Every single battle brother would be vital in the upcoming war, for the oncoming Tyranid fleet was enormous, by far the largest Tyranid host ever recorded by the Imperium. Unwilling to yield void supremacy to the Tyranids of Hive Fleet Leviathan without a fight, Commander Dante ordered his naval vessels to strike at the heart of the enemy and slow their advance. The Blood Angels' own fleet moved to meet the enemy head-on, and was joined by the presence of several spaceborne successor chapters. Hundreds of thousands of Tyranid bioships, in clusters so thick that the invasion fleet seemed to be one vast, single-minded organism, surged towards Baal and the orbiting defensive fleet. Across 100 fronts, the red-armoured voidcraft of the Blood Angels and their successors opened fire at the fleshy hive ships. Lances and gun decks split the darkness with their fury. Ruptured bioships tumbled away, slicks of ichor spilling from their sundered innards to freeze in the merciless void. The sky above Baal erupted in a violent firestorm as the immense vessels of the Space Marines slammed their way into the midst of the approaching Tyranids, launching devastating storms of nuclear-tipped warheads. One by one, Space Marine battle barges and cruisers were isolated and overwhelmed, battered by organic missiles, and enveloped by swarms of smaller bioships. The Leviathan's vessels began to release clouds of spores and organic transports into the atmosphere as they entered low orbit over Baal and its moons. As the void battle raged overhead, the defenders of Baal awaited the first wave of Tyranids, taking up defensive positions among ancient fortifications that had been unearthed and rebuilt by chapter servitors. Baal and its twin moons had been transformed into killing fields, dotted with artillery fortifications, mine-laced choke points, and overlapping fields of fire. Dozens of Tyranid bioships were destroyed, hundreds of thousands of warrior organisms slain before they ever saw the irradiated sands of Baal. Still, the Blood Angels were driven back, every victory carrying its own butcher's bill in flaming hulks and dead battle brothers. Soon enough, the Void War became unsustainable as more and more Tyranids emerged from the darkness in swarming waves. With their surviving Voidcraft forced to fall back and harass the Hive Fleet's flanks, the floodgates were opened and the Blood Angels now faced the full fury of the Tyranid invasion. On Baal and its two moons, aircraft-sized mycetic spores darkened the skies in their millions. The shadow in the warp settled like a shroud around the Baal system, choking off any further hope of reinforcement. The sons of Sanguinius stood alone in the face of the hurricane of death to come. As the first few Tyranid swarms made planetfall, they were instantly obliterated by pre-ranged artillery bombardments and a blistering volley of bolter rounds long before they could reach the defensive lines. Yet, with each passing moment, more Tyrannocyte spores rained down from low orbit, their bulging flesh sacs bursting open to disgorge warrior organisms into the fray. By the 10th wave, the ground was barely visible beneath the stampede of chitin-armoured bodies. Amidst this carpet of living flesh loomed colossal synapse creatures, hive tyrants, and giant tervigons which spewed out gaunts by the score. These larger monsters directed the swarms around them using their synaptic powers, even as they unleashed salvos of burning bioplasma or tore great rents in the fortifications with massive weapon limbs. As the enemy drew close, the fighting descended into frantic hand-to-hand slaughter as Genestealer broods swept into the breaches. At the rear of the Tyranid swarms, a hulking creature surveyed the carnage, observing the Blood Angel's strategies, directing its lesser kin to counter their every move with an instinctive cunning towards warfare. The Swarm Lord, herald of the hive mind, had been spawned anew to ensure the Blood Angel's demise. Tyranids poured from the skies in ever-increasing numbers. Their spores slammed down like hellish seed pods to spill ravenous waves of war beasts directly into battle. Orbital lasers and hurtling gunships took a mighty toll upon the Xenos, in some regions wreaking such carnage that purple ichor fell like storm rain across the defenders below. Yet still the Tyranid waves persisted, Tyrannocytes falling thicker and thicker while gargoyles and harpies swooped between them, spitting acidic gruel that sent Blood Angel's aircraft spiralling down in flames. On Baal and its moon of Baal Secundus, the hail of gunfire from defensive gunners shredded the rippling tides of warrior organisms as they surged forwards. Their corpses piled up in hideous drifts, yet still they pressed forwards, metre by metre. The settlement of Angels Fall, where the Blood Angels gathered all aspirants for the trials to become new initiates of the chapter, became a blood-drenched altar to the gods of battle, its defenders massacred by avalanches of chitinous bodies and razored talons. Gabriel Seth and his flesh terrors led the counterattack, carving their way through the dense swarms of Tyranid lifeforms, but their victories did not come without cost. At the same time, elsewhere on Baal Secundus, the Carmine Blades hold firm in efforts to defend Baal's astropathic relay facility from the onslaught of the Tyranid advance. Feet planted, bolters roaring, their defence continued to hold against impossible odds, bringing honour to their names with each bloody day that dawns in the hope that someone will hear the transmission and call for help of the Scions of Sanguinius. On the moon of Baal Prime the situation was worse still, as the Tyranids hurled overwhelming forces into battle. The Scions of Sanguinius repelled back 19 waves of Tyranid assaults over the course of solar weeks, fighting with a valour and skill that honoured the memory of their fallen Primarch. Marines from the Blood Drinkers and Angels and Carmine chapters fought back to back, forming a circle of blades and bolters against packs of advancing Tyranid warriors. Blood Angel's assault marines leapt into the heart of the enemy swarm, hunting the largest and most ferocious monsters. Amidst rad-scorched desert valleys, massed formations of Adeptus Astartes tanks and artillery clashed with stampedes of charging carnifexes in a grinding, churning maelstrom of metal and flesh. For solar weeks the fighting raged on. The Tyranid body count spirals upwards with breathtaking speed, Dante's warriors felling hundreds of Xenos for every one of their own that falls. Yet fall the Sons of Sanguinius do, as their defence lines are breached and overwhelmed one after another. As brave as the defence of Baal was, it could not last. With every Tyranid attack more battle brothers were slain. 5 chapter masters amongst the Blood Angel successor chapters gave their lives to hold back the surging tide, but as the bodies piled higher it seemed such selfless sacrifice was for nothing. Baal was ready to fall. It was at this dark hour that a fresh calamity was unleashed upon the Baal system. In a cataclysmic eruption of empiric energy, the galaxy-spanning warp storm known as the Great Rift tore open. The skies above Baal burned with etheric fire, and within the stirring depths of the immaterium, ancient malevolent beings turned their dread gaze upon the material realm. As the fighting upon the moon of Baal Prime was at its most ferocious, and as the Blood Angel successors unleashed the full measure of their hatred against the Tyranid swarms, a gateway in reality tore open, and the scent of brimstone and burning blood filled the air. Demonic legions boiled from the winding rift. At their head came a creature drawn from the blackest of nightmares, a bat-winged monstrosity wielding a rune-marked axe in one clawed fist and a barbed whip in the other. This was Ka'Bandha, bloodthirster of Khorne. No foe was more hated by the Sons of Sanguinius. For thousands of Terran years before, during the Cygnus campaign, Ka'Bandha had stoked in them the red thirst, the genetic curse which had so ravaged the chapter in the millennia afterwards. Ka'Bandha sought the sole honour of slaughtering the Blood Angels, and had no intention of allowing the Tyranids to interfere before the time of his triumph was at hand. Xenos and transhuman blood was spilled in torrents as the bloodthirster's demon legions fell upon both Tyranids and the Astartes defenders of Baal. Tyranid warriors hacked and tore at leering bloodletters, while stampedes of blood crushers swept across the gore-splattered earth, smashing termagants beneath their brazen hooves. Ka'Bandha stalked through the madness of battle, reaping their devastating toll upon all in his path with great swipes of his dread weapons. The Space Marine defenders, led by Chapter Master Gabriel Seth of the Flesh Terrors, fell back, harried on all sides. Only the sacrifice of the Knights of Blood, an excommunicated successor chapter who had nonetheless been accepted as allies by Commander Dante, allowed the survivors to board their vessels and escape, as Baal Prime was overwhelmed by warp-spawn monstrosities. As Seth's forces retreated, they caught one last glimpse of the Knights of Blood, hurling themselves into the thick of close combat with mindless fury, fully enveloped by the madness of the Black Rage. Coils of empiric energy snatched out from great warp rifts and swallowed thousands of Hive Fleet Leviathan's bioships in Baal's orbit. Soon, only the burning remnants of gutted Hive ships remained, drawn in by Baal's gravitic pull to rain down upon its ravaged surface. Below this raging inferno, Commander Dante led his fellow remaining warriors in a fighting retreat to the walls of the Blood Angels' fortress monastery, the Arx Angelicum. As the sons of Sanguinius and the beasts of Hive Fleet Leviathan fought on towards a mutual annihilation, the immense reality-bending energies emitted by the relentless warp storms began to take their toll on time itself, as every hour that passed seemed to stretch into days or even years. It's one of the reasons that no feasible data has been obtained on the actual duration of the Tyranid assault on the Baal system. The defences of the Arx Angelicum began to buckle and crack as the greatest Tyranid wave yet slammed upon the fortress like an immense tidal wave of razor-sharp teeth. It was not long before the defences were finally breached. Bodies started to pile high amidst the sundered defences as 3 chapter masters from successor chapters fell in battle while leading the defence of the Dome of Angels. Still the defenders fought on, even throwing open the gates of the Tower of Amario and letting the captive members of the Death Company loose. If the Blood Angels were to die, they intended to do so in battle and on their own terms. Forward strode the Swarm Lord, entering the fray and carving the Space Marines apart with every slice of its jagged bone swords. Exhausted and filled with sorrow, yet defiant as ever, Dante hacked his way through the swarm of Tyranid flesh with his Axe Mortalis, seeking the Swarm Lord's head. The two engaged in a desperate battle under the burning sky until Dante, bleeding from sustained mortal wounds, cut the creature down. The Swarm Lord had been vanquished. The tortured skies finally cleared as Dante collapsed to the ground, his anguished warriors straining to reach his battered body. Where before the Hive Fleet had blotted the sky, now not a single Xenos vessel remained. The storm had finally passed, and had been replaced by a fleet of Imperial ships. The Primarch Reboot Guilliman, the resurrected Avenging Sun, had arrived at the head of the great Indomitus crusade. Now it was drop pods and Stormraven gunships which dotted the skies above Baal, as Guilliman and his marines crashed down into the thick of the Tyranid swarm to aid their battle brothers and prevent their near extinction. Hive Fleet Leviathan's remaining ground forces still outnumbered the Space Marines, but the death of the Swarm Lord resulted in the collapse of the psychic synapse field, causing nearby Hormagaunts and Termagaunts to revert to their frenzied predatory instincts. And although it invigorated their ravenous bloodthirst, it also completely diminished their ability to coordinate their attacks, which yielded an opening for the Space Marines' counter-offensive. Fighting at Guilliman's side, the new breed of transhuman warriors, the Primaris Space Marines, who had been birthed from the vaults of Mars by Belisarius Cawl, unleashed devastatingly accurate salvos of fire from the Mark II pattern bolt rifles, and the mighty host of the Leviathan was cut to pieces. The salvation of Baal did not come quickly, or without cost. Even as Guilliman's forces rained down to relieve the siege of the Arx Angelicum, and joined forces with the surviving sons of Sanguinius, still more Imperial lives are lost. Yet hopeless defeat has become a glorious victory against the odds. Meanwhile, if certain grim secrets of the Blood Angel's gene line were laid bare before the eyes of the Ultramarines Primarch, he chose to keep his own counsel and leave such things unspoken. Before a solar month was out, Baal Secundus was cleansed of all Tyranid lifeforms. The slaughter was spearheaded by Primaris Space Marines clad in the heraldry of the Blood Angels and their successors. The moon of Baal Prime had been utterly stripped of life during the conflict, and no such material efforts were required. Nothing remained but desolation. Though Gabriel Seth and his last surviving flesh terrors had escaped the unnatural cataclysm unleashed by the opening of the Great Rift, the demons had vanished back into the warp, leaving nothing behind but mountains of Tyranid skulls. In the wake of the devastation of Baal, gravely wounded but still alive, Commander Dante bent the knee to the Ultramarines Primarch, now the ruling Lord Commander of the Imperium, who bestowed upon him the title of Regent of the Imperium Nihilus, the portion of the Imperium in the galactic north cut off from Terra and the light of the Astronomicon by the Great Rift. In Dante and the surviving Blood Angels and their successor chapters, Guilliman recognised a noble spirit, a flickering flame kept alive from the Imperium's glorious past. His gift to them was mighty indeed, formations of Primaris Space Marines with which to bolster their devastated ranks, derived from the bloodline and gene seed of Sanguinius. After a period of intensive reconstruction of Baal and recovery for the chapter, and with Commander Dante declared regent of the entire Imperium Nihilus by Reboot Guilliman, the Blood Angels and their successors were soon ready to rejoin the war for the Emperor's realm.